you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This is another of our popular Listener's Choice interviews, which we're playing over the weekend. We've chosen the most popular interviews for you to select the Listener's Choice winner. If you're not sure how the Listener's Choice competition works, have a look at horsechats.com/choice for the rules and the leaderboard. If you have the same vision as International Horse College, which is to have a world where people safely appreciate, respect and enjoy their horses, and the horses appreciate, respect and enjoy their people, then have a look at their website, internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352. Our guest today is Catherine McDowell. So Catherine's a qualified coach. She started bush riding and then grew an interest in classical riding. She's also a qualified herbalist and she's worked alongside Robert McDowell and studied under Dorothy Hall. Catherine's also a regular contributor to health articles for several magazines, including Holistic Horse Magazine, USA Baroque Horse, Dressage International, Equine News Australia, Quarter Horse Magazine and other periodicals. How are you today, Kath?
I'm really well, thanks, and thanks for having me.
Oh, look, good to talk to you, Kath. A good subject for people with horses. I think equine nutrition's good, or the herbs that can go alongside complementing, I suppose, horse feed, horse nutrition is, I think, an area of interest to a lot of people. So it's really good talking to you. But before we get started on that, I'd like to know what your favourite quote is, something that you regularly say or something that's inspired you, influenced you with horses. What have you got?
Well, I don't think you can go past "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food," which is of course by the famous Hippocrates. You can't get anything more encapsulating of what herbal medicine actually is than that.
All right. Tell us about, now I know you started off with bush riding. I know you started off, as a lot of people do, just on a family property and then went to classical. But tell us one of your early memories of horses, something that you sort of you learned by or you know what not to do. Can you remember something?
Well, I mean, I think all horse owners, when you're getting into it, particularly, when I was growing up, it was very much in the bush, and it certainly isn't like it is now with the information that's around there. So everything was kind of handed down, and I was, helped by my grandfather, who was in World War I. He was an artillery wagon driver, and we ran the farm, and he had 18 horses. And so I really grew up with that very deep history of animal care. But by the time I came along, it had bypassed a generation. So my dad didn't give two hoots about horses, although he did have some standard breds that he bred and raced a couple. And, of course, we were cattle farmers. So anything that we did was obviously had to be of practical nature. So, and you learn to do things with what you have. We didn't have special facilities. Everything had to be worked together. So all of our horses, I think we ended up having, probably 40 horses at one point on our property, and they were all in a band. So you'd learn to, run horses in particular ways, and you learn unique ways of training them. You just invent them yourself. So I was always, riding bareback or using a halter. And then, of course, the care of them, we didn't really have much to do with that because they were all self-caring. And we rarely wormed them. They were out on pasture. The only time, and this probably was the most pivotal thing that I remember, was my beautiful pony. I'd been given for my 11th birthday this beautiful little 3-year-old black, I think he was a stock horse cross Morgan horse, and he was about 13'3", spunkiest little horse you've ever seen, really showy. And I just loved that horse. I went everywhere with him. I taught him to, do a levade. To me, it was a rear. I thought I was, some sort of Western person, and just doing fun things like that. But the thing that was really disappointing that we didn't know is that he got into some wheat one day and got some toxic laminitis. So that was probably my first and early on understanding of these really chronic conditions, laminitis, and and there was very, very little that anyone knew about it back then. Basically it was just do the best you can. And I, we locked him up off, pasture, and I remember walking him 3 times a day, and my vet, who I ended up working with my vet, years later, as a vet nurse. But, we were working really steadily, and we had no idea what we were doing back in those days with horses. No, it's nothing like it is now.
Yes.
It's the knowledge that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that would have been traumatic for you as a young child too, your favourite horse. Yeah. Tell us about your career with horses, because you've sort of had you've had a couple, you've been a coach and now you're a herbalist. Tell us what made you have a career, what was the steps there?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things, the early drivers of my career was the fact that I had a young child and I had to take care of them, and you have to take care of yourself. So all of my decisions really have been based around, what serves the best purpose at the most immediate moment. And fortunately for me, organically, I have come across some great opportunities which I've been bold enough to take. The first one, of course, being a vet nurse, which then, I went to Hawkesbury Ag and learned obviously about equine health, but and general management. But post that, I was working for vets. I then actually by chance ended up working as a case manager for 10 years for a government organisation for people with disabilities. So I learned a lot about psychology and things like that during that time. And of course, during that 10 years, I was also a part-time coach outside, because that was my love. My love was always the horses, and it was always there. So the coaching side of it started when I was young, because my dad and mum were happy for us to sort of have a little bit of a trail riding business on the side. So we did that at home, earn a bit of money, and I sort of started that idea. Went to university, sort of kept doing a little bit of coaching on the side. Then I decided to get qualified, which was a big deal for me, because I was always a little bit worried and daunted by these amazing practitioners out there. These people are incredible. You just have to look at Colleen Brook and all those wonderful Olympians. And it's very daunting for someone who's, just from the bush looking at these people. But I did. I got the courage up, and I invested in doing my level ones, and I had the privilege of riding with some of these people. And I found myself a lovely mare. She was a C-grade show jumper, and I learned how to actually show jump. And it was a really lovely thing to do. And post that, I was able to then bring my education from my psychology into my coaching, and I really was able to integrate that really well. And I became quite a well-known coach actually locally, and I ended up also doing some assessment work for Burke Marrie and Hartog through their coaching course. And I did that for many, many years. Yeah, very interesting.
For sure. And then you started to become interested in herbs, becoming a herbalist. You got some qualifications. Yeah. How does the business help complement horse people?
Well, I think what's interesting about this business is, first of all, it's located in Bathurst where I was, so it's a geographical accident. And really,
but people can get some of your goods by post, can't they? It's not just people around Bathurst.
Yeah, that's right. It's completely. We're actually an international business now. Mm-hmm. But how I came to be involved in this business is because it was located here, and Robert McDowell, who everybody probably now knows, he wrote the book Herbal Horsekeeping. He's the one that started the business, and he was a Dorothy Hall graduate. And then, of course, I met him at some point during our, cohabitation of the same town, and I was always very interested in horses. And then at the time I was sort of interested through my psychology training. I was sort of getting into alternative thinking, because there were some very interesting studies being done at the time on yoga, meditation and alternative things. So I was that was piquing my interest. My sister's a homeopath, and natural things just seemed to be a better option in my opinion, because I was brought up without, the use of drugs. So it seemed a very natural thing for me. And when I met Robert, I was immediately aware of the fact that he knew nothing about horses, but was a very, very, very good herbalist. Whereas I knew a lot about horses, I was also into alternative things. And so I actually had my own rooms there as a practicing counsellor for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some support work there, and he and I were working together for a long time before we actually got married. But at that point, we were sort of working together and were going out west and seeing horses and going up, and I was advising him behind the scenes. And that was ongoing after our marriage, actually. And of course, I then became qualified, and it just becomes an organic thing. And then we set up a farm, a rehab centre, which was known as Kellershill Park. And that was a very beautiful property which we set up specifically for rehabbing horses, and that's where I spent a lot of my time coaching, actually. Yeah, from I guess, when was that happening? From say 2003 to 2009. Yeah, that took place.
So if someone wants to work with horses, if you've got someone even at your property now that wanted to work with horses and they came out and you wanted to give them a job to do some horse care, what sort of, besides the knowledge, what sort of core skills or character traits would they have to have?
Well, I think they just have to know how to work. I mean, I think the key thing and I just remember being when I went to Hawkesbury, for example, I didn't know what I was doing really. I mean, no one knows what they're doing out there. I mean, just for anyone's information, no one really knows what they're doing in the world. It's all a bit like an accident. And you can have plans so long as your plans are made of string. So my advice is be prepared to be flexible, be prepared to work hard, but you do have to have an end goal in mind. So, I mean, it depends on what your end goal is. Now, as an employer, because I now employ staff, what am I looking for? Well, it depends on the type of the job, obviously, but hard work. You've got to be able to be adaptable, turn your hand at many skills, be a bit practical about it, and not be too precious about things. I think that's number one. And in terms of working for, say, our business in particular, being able to be multitask is probably critical, and IT skills. So you've got two or three ends of the spectrum going on here. It's the world's becoming very complex, so it's a bit of a tricky question.
But I think the multitasking is important too, particularly in small businesses, because small businesses might need someone to look hard to care for horses, but also to jump on the computer, and also to be able to answer the phone, and also to be able to, even repair something or coach or do something else. It's not just all about I'm going to work with horses and all I'll do all day is just pat horses. It's having many skills under the same umbrella, and even you bringing your psychology into your coaching. If you can bring it all in and have skills that complement each other, I think that's quite good.
Well, I think life experience, life by nature of it, by the fact that we're living, is educating us at every moment. And you either have an understanding of that or you don't. You either think that, life is a bit like a railway track and there's just all these very steps and I just have to go on the next step. It's not like that. Life is filled with so many variables that the key thing as an individual that I look for is adaptability and and the integrity to follow through on your word, and of course being able to be a hard worker and reliability. All those things are things I work for. Skills can be trained, but character can't be trained. Character is innate, and I tend to look for people with good character as my primary choice. And I do find that people that work with horses educate you, because horses by virtue are complete mirrors to you. So if you're going to be not a particularly nice person, you're not going to be a particularly successful horse person.
No, that's right.
So
that's right.
So most horse people I find are pretty decent people, is what I find.
What's the best thing about working in the horse industry?
Well, I actually think it is the people. I think it's very rare to come across someone who's trying to take advantage of horses in the wrong way. I think most people have got a good intention. They're with horses because they know horses provide something in their life that is incredibly valuable. And unless, there's always the person out there who sees it as an ego thing. I think those people are less and less. I think the core people, and particularly the people I deal with, are the people that really genuinely love their animals and they want to have a nice life. And I find that those people are absolute joy to be with, and I love my job because I'm dealing with people who really love their horses.
Yeah, yeah. You've talked about Robert McDowell and Dorothy Hall as people who've influenced you and helped you in your career, but what about horses? Have you got a particular horse who you'd like to mention?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a story because this is probably the single most important case history that has really it's really influenced the way this practice is run now, and it comes back to this extraordinary condition, laminitis, which everyone in the horse industry knows about it. So the story is I had a beautiful horse that I bought from a very expensive horse, I'll say, because I was having a moment in my coaching career that I thought I might go professional at one point, which we all do. We all have a fancy for that. So I bought this expensive horse and thinking that this horse was going to be my horse to, really put my efforts into. And of course, this is where the lesson about life teaches you that what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing are usually two different things. So I bought this very expensive horse, and yes, he was definitely going to give me the career support that I needed, but not in the way I thought. So I get this expensive horse home, and he is very overweight. He'd been fed in the stable, and look, he was about 7 years old. He was a Jive Magic gelding. He was bred by Heath and Rosie Ryan, a beautiful horse. But he hadn't been worked very much. So by the time I had him, he'd sort of been kept in a stable and pampered and looked beautiful and, looked absolutely gorgeous and been lunged a lot, but that was about it. But when I got him home, because I brought him from Victoria and I brought him up to New South Wales, that trip it's quite an extraordinary trip. It happened in December or January, so it was a hot trip. He was fed the carrier. He was with a carrier who obviously just used lucerne hay as their main fodder. He was fed lucerne hay the whole way. I picked him up in Sydney. By the time I got him home, he was just very doughy, and he was a little bit lame. I took him off the float and let him have a run around. He didn't want to move. He was slightly lame. I couldn't tell. I didn't know what the hell was wrong with him. I couldn't believe that I bought this horse and he was just lame. Anyway, as it progressed, I put him out again thinking that was the right thing to do, didn't know what was going on, only for him to, 6 hours later, develop a full-blown case of laminitis.
Oh, wow.
So bad that he then had an 11-degree rotation, and no one, and I'm telling you, no one in Australia could tell me how to fix this horse. Not one person. And it took me 2 years to fix this horse. And the reason I've actually have got a really good program for laminitis and equine metabolic syndrome, all these syndromes. This is when was it? This was 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So back when this was happening, no one knew anything about it. Metabolic syndrome was a bit of a catchphrase because nobody else knew what to call it. Vets were sort of toying with the idea. No one was sort of saying anything about what it was. In herbal medicine as a herbalist, we treat the metabolism all the time. So I was kind of working along these ideas, but no one could tell me what to feed him properly. And, I was thinking, hang on a minute, I was going to have to work this out for myself. So I did. So I ended up working it out. I went through the whole program. We did special shoeing. We did everything. Everything that was out there at the time, we did it. And eventually I worked out exactly what we needed to do to fix this horse. And I did. I got him right. The rotation was corrected, got the syndrome completely under control so you could put him out. You still had to manage him, but, it wasn't going to be a trigger like it would be that a trigger could have been an apple core before,
sure.
Whereas, once they're corrected, things, you get a much greater degree of flexibility
mm-hmm.
in how your management goes. And I kept that horse down. That horse has since moved on to a new owner who's having the best time with him, which I'm really delighted for. He was too intensive for me because I'm so busy in the business.
Yep.
But where he is now, he's in 100% sound. He's being managed well, and it's perfect. But that horse, Jamison was his name. was probably the most educational horse and important horse I've probably ever owned, besides Rosie, who took me over some massive oxes when I was doing my jumps down for my little ones in front of Colleen Brook and Simon Cale for my assessments.
Okay, what do you think your proudest moment is?
Well, I think my proudest moment would have been doing those jumps with Colleen Brook, watching me and getting past for my level ones.
And that was with Rosie, riding Rosie, yeah.
That was big Rosie, and actually she is, you can see her on my website page, and actually, yeah, I'll have to do another post about her. She's passed on now, but she was a gorgeous mare and just so honest, beautiful.
Okay, now just to do with people understanding the nature of the use of herbs for horses in a holistic way, what should be your biggest challenge?
Well, I think just getting people to realise that the body is an ecosystem. All bodies. I mean, we are part of a massive ecosystem. I mean, we are part of the ecosystem. We're influencing the ecosystem as we speak. This is what the climate change debate's all about. You move that to a micro level. Our own bodies are an ecosystem, and we now know that. All that information that's coming out about microbiota, and we all already know that the biology on our body is massive, and it's a symbiosis. So understanding that we are operating within and can influence consciously our environment is a really important thing. And herbs, how do they relate to that? Because they're compost. They're composting our bodies. And if we are composting our bodies, the synergistic nature of the smallest amount of nutrition, plus don't forget that herbs have components in them that aren't necessarily have been studied or identified as being beneficial. And science, as fabulous as it is, doesn't actually look at the relationship between things. It's only just beginning to realise things like cofactors and hormones that actually are the biology of emotion. These sorts of things are very recent science. So a lot of people are still functioning in very old paradigm science. So you could say that if you're an up-to-date holistic therapist, you're actually cutting edge, because it's in our interest to look at exactly where the human race is going, where the environment's going, and where health is going, because everything is interconnected. So that is my biggest thing, is to get people to really understand how interconnected we all really are, and where herbs sit in that. Herbs sit as probably one of the most under-recognised but most powerful and most potent forms of helping us to find a dynamic balance within that. And, one of the things, and this is why I've got my 2 lectures happening at Equitana, which we'll probably talk about later, but one is on the compromised equine metabolism, and I'm going to go into some great depth about that. In that 1-hour lecture, I've got some fantastic and really recent science to help support what I'm saying. But of course it is, a lot of this is philosophical as well. So you've got to have in your own mind a worldview and a philosophy that can sort of adapt to these changes, because we all know that survival of the fittest actually comes down to those that are the most adaptable. So we need things that are adaptive, and herbal medicine is also adaptive. So we have this ability within herbal medicine to support not only weaknesses of the system, but to normalise systems and to help systems adapt, and that is critical to our modern way of thinking.
Okay. Thinking about the clients that you consult to, the people that you consult to about their horses, what's the most common bit of education you give them? What's a common fault or something that they lack that you educate them or you fix?
Well, I think because there's a lot of, and this is probably the easiest to digest, is about the digestion. So I do work a lot with digestion because it's topical. There's a lot of science coming out about it now, and I love it because it just is what we do, and it's what we've always done. And so things that we've always done are now becoming so topical. So I can really bring those things into with some really hard science to show people, well, hey, I'm not just talking out of my mind here. There is history associated with this. There's also relevant science associated with this. And, of course, if you become an objective observer of your own environment, you will begin to see it as well. If you take a perspective, a step back, and by education you can encourage people to look at those things in slightly different ways, and they can see the patterns and they can notice things in a different way.
All right, so we talk about digestion. What can we do to help improve a horse's digestion?
Well, I think one of the key things is, of course, you have to assess the diet, because all horses need very simple digestion. They need simple starches or non-soluble fibre. Yep. A lot of that, which is forage. And I have my specific diets that I like to use, and it's, of course, coupled with that, it's got to be available. It's got to be available to everybody, and everyone's environment's slightly different. So depending on the individual's environment, I tend to talk to people about just keeping it very simple, low GI. I'm a big advocate of just keeping it so simple that I don't even like to put additives in unless we absolutely have to. So the only additives that I like to use are usually herbs or seeds, so whole foods. And then we go from there. So if there's definite deficiencies, and we assess the soil, and we look at pasture, and we do things holistically. So herbs aren't necessarily just about herbs, because, I'm a herbalist, but it is about looking at the whole environment and where your animal sits. So, for example, an animal or a horse that's in a stable situation and being, shown is going to have a slightly different prescription from me than a horse that's in a wonderful open field with native pasture, which is naturally low GI anyway, and is experiencing long periods of dryness. Those horses are often the best. Yep. Those horses are the healthiest, and they're the horses that I grew up with in that environment. So we see the biggest changes of the microbiota is actually in the smaller environments where they're getting intensively farmed, given all sorts of wonderful things that look really good on the label but may not necessarily be that good internally, and compromise their gut health. And of course, then we've got all the other concerns like, excessive use of bute, or overworming, or maybe too much antibiotics, or whatever it might be that's compromising their metabolism at any one time because of these external factors. So it's a pretty intensive kind of assessment and consultation that you'll get with me to find out exactly which way we need to go.
Yeah. What about books?
Yeah, so if we're looking at books to read, anything from Dorothy Hall, of course, I recommend. They are hard to get, but so it depends on what sort of reading that you want to do. The Robert McDowell book, the Herbal Horsekeeping book, is now currently out of print, unfortunately, but I do know that it is available in some secondhand book places, so I'm sure people can find it. Our website is absolutely jam-packed with so much information. So if you want really good up-to-date reading, our website's fantastic. And in terms of riding information, I can't go past Philippe Carl.
Okay. Yep. Because I think you were instrumental in bringing him to Australia. Is that right?
Yep, I was. That's right. Yeah, no, I was. I actually went to France and I met him and invited him over, and I did that with another girl who was in WA, and we both brought him out together, and I hosted him at our property here in Bathurst in 2009. And that was instrumental at starting the Legerté movement in Australia.
Now, what are you looking forward to now?
Well, we're just looking forward to getting to Equitana.
Yeah, I was going to say the 2 lectures at Equitana. Just tell us a little bit, give us a bit of background about the 2.
Okay, so the first lecture is about natural worming protocols, which I am focusing a lot on digestion, and I do give a lot of practical tips and take home, so you can go home, make up some mixes for yourself. You don't have to buy anything from me. You can just do it yourself and start that. And I'll be breaking down, obviously the whole link between the gut dysbiosis and general health, and I'll also be presenting some amazing case studies for people as well.
Yep.
And then the second one is on the compromised equine metabolism, which, as I said before, is Jamie's my little horse that's helped me get to understand that even more.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sure you've heard of insulin resistance, Cushing's,
Yes.
and metabolic syndrome. You've heard of all of those conditions. So, and unfortunately, they are, those conditions now are on the rise, primarily because of the change of our environment. I mean, it's human impact. It's what we're doing to our feed. It's what we're doing to our day-to-day lives. It's not just humans anymore. Well, it was always everything, including our horses.
All right. Now, Kath, in just a couple of sentences, can you summarise your philosophy with horses?
Okay, so it's purum non serum, which is first do no harm. So that's the Latin.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, Hippocrates. Yeah. First do no harm. It's the Hippocratic oath. And, and I think that whilst, that's sort of the modern medicine's catch cry, it really did originate as healers and herbalists. That's where it came from.
Okay.
And I think that, we can apply that philosophy in our treatment of horses, in our treatment of each other, and in our treatment of the world. So I think that's probably why my philosophy is as it is.
Okay. No, that's good. That's good. Now, apart from seeing you at Equitana, Kath, and your details will be on your page, which will be horsechats.com/Catherine McDowell. Go to horsechats.com, search for Catherine, search for McDowell. How else can people contact you, just in case they...
You can just search McDowell's Herbal on Google and we'll come up. You can find us on Facebook, again, McDowell's Herbal, and the website address is mcdowellsherbal.com.
Perfect. All right, Kath, thanks very much for talking to us. Great to talk to you, and we'll either talk to you again sometime soon or catch up at Equitana.
Look, I look forward to it, and thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.